when George died, Christmas Day, we were travelling from my in-laws to my parents in the car, and obviously it was on the radio. And my kids became interested. They're young, you know, they were 12 and 7 at the time. And we immediately started talking about George Michael and about Wham. And about 3 weeks later, they said, Mum, you know that guy that died? He was in a really cool band called Wham. And I was like, yeah, you're right, he was. And so I think you are right. There is a generation that doesn't know the full story, that because of his death perhaps became aware of some of the music, but not all of the music. And I think it's really interesting to go back to the beginning. It almost feels like some magical luck that kind of brought you together. First of all, he joined your school. Then you put your hand up to show him around, and then the friendship sort of grew from there. Tell me about that, how it's all started.
Well, I think you're right in identifying that those points along the way that were perhaps luck and fortune, if you like. And so obviously him coming to Bushey Meads in the first place as the new boy in 1975, and having the misfortune to be put in my charge.
Were you responsible, Andrew?
No. No, I was definitely not the person you'd have chosen.
Not that his parents would have chosen.
No, not his mum and dad would have chosen. I think that I wasn't the first choice as far as my teacher went either. But I was the only one who had their hand up, so kind of limited her options. So, but all along the way, once we'd been introduced and we started discovering our mutual likes and those points of reference upon which our relationship and friendship was going to be based, then we quickly became really firm friends. And it was a friendship that was largely built on juvenile, puerile, schoolboy humour. To be expected, we were just that. But music was something that we both felt really deeply about, and was a all-consuming for both of us. So that was that, and that obviously those two strands were the basis upon which the friendship was built.
And it was you that said to him, all right, we love this stuff called music. We love pop. Maybe we should start making it ourselves. Maybe we should form a band. And you had to kind of really cajole him initially, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. I mean, it's something we talked about for really since about the age of 14, being in a band and writing songs, making music. But it wasn't something that he was going to dive into. He felt the pressure of his parents' expectations to achieve academically more strongly than I felt the pressure from my mum and dad. And so it was something that was always seemed to me to be getting put off. Initially it was after the O levels, we'll form out after the O levels, and then it was after the A levels, and at that point. I thought that's decade, that's a lifetime away, which it does seem at that age. And so, November the 5th, 1979, when I made one of my rare appearances at school in the sixth form, and I sought my form tutor out and said, "Break, I'm going to leave school," and she said, "That's just as well, Andrew, because we were going to ask you to." That was a big step for me, and that night I phoned George and said, right, I'd secured myself a place at Cassio College, and I said to George, we're going to form a band. I wasn't asking him, I was telling him, and his resolve cracked. I think he felt that it was futile putting up any resistance. So yeah, I cajoled and railroaded him into forming our band, The Executive.
On that last concert, which I think was called The Final, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
When he sort of very movingly hugged you and said, couldn't have done it without you or whatever. He obviously knew how much it was two of you in the band, I think, and people around you and your fans did. But do you think somehow maybe people have lost your input a little bit over the years? And maybe that's one of the reasons why this book is good. Do you know what I mean? That people can really get the journey, because he then went on to such a big solo career. Do you think it's important that the fact you were that pair locked together is told?
I'm not I was never one for setting records straight. Those that enjoyed Wham and understood what it was, I think instinctively, or at least knew innately, that there couldn't have been Wham, either me or George, alone. It was very much that, as I said, that representation of our relationship made real, made into music, and so therefore to, I think perhaps some people, because I was the junior partner in terms of songwriting, certainly after we made the decision for George to take over those songwriting duties completely.
Why did you do that?
Because he was a much better songwriter. So we felt that to go where we wanted to go as quickly as we wanted to go there, then that role of songwriting would necessarily be shouldered by George. It was going to be something that would happen more easily, and so my role was, in that sense, was diminished, and I think people couldn't see beyond that in some respects. I don't think they necessarily could. The intangible that was what made Wham, and I can't define it perfectly. I think because it is and was intangible, not something that you can put your finger on, not something that is easily defined, but it represents so much of what people found attractive and find attractive in relationships, that affection, that filial fondness, and the pleasure that it was evident that we derived from each other's company.
When things started to unravel, which he's talked about himself publicly, was it quite hard, or was it almost like a different George, the one that was there at the beginning?
That aspect of his personality was something that he really did keep very much private. It wasn't something that he was really prepared to share with anyone, and that I understood that. I'm not sure necessarily that that's particularly wise, but when we were growing up together and during our career as Wham, things were pretty much plain sailing. He was only beginning success, and the pressure that started to exert on the difference between the private life, the private man, and public life, was beginning to have an effect on him towards the end of our career, because our success was global, and it was beginning to become a factor in our lives. And but it hadn't existed really throughout the early years. We were, just having a wonderful time and becoming successful. The consequences and the of fame and celebrity hadn't really began to exert a pressure at that point. So largely they were unfelt. It was he is on record as saying, had he known how difficult it was to go solo, he may have thought twice about it. But that's not something that I think either of us, perhaps at that point, would have been able to foresee.
Very quickly, do you miss him?
Yes. I think anyone who knew him, anyone whose life he had any kind of influence upon misses him. And as my dearest friend of my youth and beyond, I miss him perhaps as much as anyone. So you don't expect your peers to start disappearing in what actually in this day and age is a relatively young age. I thought my grandfather was old at 50 odd, but I don't feel old, and actually it's not old these days.